Hello, fiendlings, how the hell are ya? After months and months, we're finally here to say goodbye to the world of the EET. At least for now. I have plenty more stories about EETs in my brain, and I want to write them. Not all of them will have alien creatures in them, but I guarantee they'll be suspenseful and fun. If you want more books in the Black, Suits, and Soul and Beyond series, do me a favor. I don't monetize my podcast or YouTube channel directly. Instead of airing commercials or shilling products, apart from Corpse Coffee, visit corpsecoffee.com and get the dead in your cup, I rely solely on the profits generated from book sales, audiobook sales, tips from venues like buymeacoffee.com, and of course, the subscription services like Patreon, Ko-Fi, and buymeacoffee.com. You might be under the impression that published writers make a lot of money, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Most of us live without the benefit of advances or a guaranteed steady income. When unexpected medical, vet, or house bills hit, all of which have happened multiple times over the last few years, it's nearly impossible to wait an entire quarter to get paid for sales you made 6 months ago, meaning you go further and further into debt. When you have a bad quarter, you get paid hardly any money at all. So if you can, please purchase a copy of the Station 3 audiobook from me or other outlets, purchase the ebook from Amazon, tip me using Buy Me a Coffee, or subscribe to Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, or Ko-Fi. Every little bit helps. If you want exclusive content like the next serial, which I'm currently writing, become a subscriber and enjoy my tales long before they find a home in the publishing world. Thank you for listening to Station 3, and I hope you enjoyed it. Please like and review the podcast and tell others about it on social media. Be safe, have a great month of October, and we'll talk again soon. Here's episode 23, the finale of Station 3. Chapter 37. He didn't make it 2 meters before something whipped his left leg out from under him. Sylph crashed to the thick flora that immediately began entwining him. Tendrils shot out of the wall of creatures, each grabbing at his boots and beginning to pull. Without a thought, Zilf rolled sideways, aimed at one of the reactors he hadn't savaged, and sent a small plasma burst into its side. Steam billowed out and blasted the wall, tearing it in half and eliciting another chorus of inhuman anger, frustration, and pain. The tendrils from the wall pulled back, but those in the deck continued to tangle him up. Tired. So fucking tired. Shark swims. Shark eats. Shark keeps moving or shark dies. Zilf pulled himself up, the servos in his right leg and arms screaming with the effort. The tangled nest of tendrils locking him to the floor ripped and tore. Stumbling, the left side of his visor showing him nothing but darkness, he swung his wrench into each of the 6 remaining reactors as he walked past. Puffs of steam shot out, covering his escape. He reached the airlock, his ears filled with the sound of an alien hunger that bordered on hate. The hack took less than a second, and the outer door revolved open. On the verge of collapse, he pulled himself inside and hit the lock stud. As the airlock cylinder turned, he caught sight of the wall of creatures. It flowed beneath the gouts of steam like an incoming ocean, mouths and appendages reaching toward him. The airlock finally closed. Panting, he leaned back against the wall and waited as the toxic atmosphere vented from the airlock. Red water bubbled up from the vent in the floor and over his boots. In 30 seconds, the cylinder had completely immersed the airlock. His suit announced he was no longer at 1 atmosphere, but 50, and the pressure continued to rise. If he had his math right, and the relative depth of the module, he was looking at over 300 atmospheres of pressure. Without the suit's pressure package, he'd never survive. At 315 atmospheres, the light above the airlock turned green as integrity alarms continued flaring across his HUD. With the condition his suit was in, he had maybe 20 minutes of ocean time before he was pulverized into a thimble. Zilf put the wrench back in its slot, swung open the airlock, and met Zhao Tu's ocean. His suit lights, even set at full ambient, did little to illuminate the expanse around him. Standing on the airlock lip's edge, he glanced down into an abyss. How far down did it go? Hundreds of meters? Thousands? If you don't pay attention, Shark, you might find out, he said aloud, a little shocked at how much his voice sounded like the old man's. Zilf activated his mag gloves, reached around the airlock's corner, and locked his left hand to the module. His left leg wasn't much use, but he could still use his right boot to lock to the metal, and for purchase. Using his 3 working limbs, he climbed the station side. How much distance could he cover in the time he had left? A bright string of lights attached to the station ran from the first level all the way down to this module and looked as though it might be thick enough to hold his mass. With that in mind, he changed his trajectory, still moving upward, but at a diagonal to the cable some 30 meters away. He climbed upward, a three-legged metal spider with a useless fourth leg dangling in space. After a minute, he reached the cable and pulled hard. It resisted, but didn't snap. Without a thought, Zilf pulled himself hand over hand up the module's outer bulkhead. In 2 minutes, he was past level 11 that contained the artifact, and most of the way past level 10. Level 10 had an airlock just like that of level 11. At least one design consideration had been repeated. At level 9, he sidled away from the cable into the module's maintenance airlock. He only had a few minutes left before his suit gave up the ghost to the massive pressure. By the time he reached the airlock, he knew his estimate had been far off. He had less than a minute, if he was lucky. After connecting to the airlock interface, he sent the command to open. The light above the airlock turned green. Just as he pulled the door open and stepped inside, the airlock lights died, as did the control system. Zilf glared at the dead hollow panel and stabbed the menu stud. Nothing happened. Good try, Harvey, he thought, and connected to the interface. Harvey might know station codes and how to lock people out, but he didn't seem to know the failsafe protocols built into every item Shinsho made. Airlocks, often considered the difference between life and death, had multiple. His hack took mere seconds, and the outer cylinder shut, locking him inside with the crimson liquid. A vibration started in his feet, and a moment later the water volume decreased. Seconds later, he stood in the dry cylinder waiting for the pressure to equalize. As the atmospheres counted down from 310 to the expected 1, he caught his breath and checked his suit. The pressure outside had nearly gotten him, but the suit's pressure package quickly replenished itself by drawing in the air that filled the cylinder. If he had to go back out, he might have as many as 5 minutes before the suit cratered. Might. When the atmospheric pressure equalized, the bright red flashing indicator light turned green. Zilf pulled the wrench from his back and moved it to his non-tool hand. His plasma torch popped up, the teardrop sputtering to life. 20% fuel. This was it. This was all he had left. The cylinder opened, and thankfully he found himself on a deck clean of the flora. No sign of any alien life at all. How was that possible? Restricted module? He moved forward as quietly as he could, his left leg dragging more than ever, the servos barely responding. The dragging boot made a sound that set his teeth on edge. Still, it was better than the keening and screeching of those things on the module below. Harvey had to be here somewhere, maybe even in the subs on level 4 again. Or maybe he'd already reached the lift. Didn't matter. Zilf was going to find the asshole and torch his face. Fuck Shinsho. Fuck orders. A short corridor led him to a half-moon-shaped room with several hatches. 2 were marked maintenance, the third engineering supplies. Grinning, he hacked the hatch and stepped inside the engineering space. A rack of pressure suits, not EETs, stood in the corner, unmolested, fully functional, and just waiting for an engineer to step inside them. He hissed out a sigh as he examined the suits. They'd been designed for the outside pressure, sure, but all the tools were manual, none built in. Metal cutters, bolt guns, and 2 plasma torches sat in their racks in the bulkhead. He giggled when he saw 5 spare wrenches. He could jettison his damaged suit, climb into one of these, and head back out into the water if he wanted. His hacking tools would be gone, as well as his expansive HUD and his physical power greatly limited. Another fight in his current suit, and he was pretty sure it would come apart helmet first. While the atmosphere in this space appeared to be nominal, there was little guarantee that would remain the case. If Harvey had a way to vent the nasty gas from the lower levels, he'd be... A tremendous vibration shook the facility, followed by the distant scream of metal. Module 9 canted a centimeter in one direction before doing the same in the other. Zilf grinned. That was more than likely Modules 10 and 11 collapsing. At least he hoped so. If the reactors he'd tossed in the pool had vaporized the water, the artifact's radiation would have burned through the steel and depressurized both modules.
Zilf, you asshole!
Harvey's voice filled his comms.
I know you're back on the station and can hear me.
I can, Zilf agreed. He picked up one of the spare wrenches, clamped it to his left arm as he had done before, grabbed one of the portable plasma torches from the wall, and a cutter. The fuel packs for the portable weren't compatible with his built-in torch. How was he going to carry all this shit? Sylph glanced at his damaged left leg and sighed. He clamped the bulky cutter tool to the more or less dead limb, knowing it would drag even more from the extra mass, and grabbed one of the bolt guns, loaded it with the bandolier, tossed 2 reloads into his pouch, and clamped the bolt gun to his right leg. The portable? He'd have to carry that. His pack had room for 2 plasma refills. He slammed a fresh cartridge into the portable tool and filled his pack with 2 cartridges. If only he could fix his helmet, he'd be in decent shape. That, however, wasn't going to happen. After taking stock of the remaining tools and supplies in the room, he decided he had all he could carry. "L'Atfdirid," he said to the engineering space before walking out. Considering how unlucky he'd been thus far, saying thanks to the room seemed in order. With the hatch closed, he limped away from it and to the hatch that simply said, "Engineering." He took a deep breath, the portable plasma torch feeling awkward in his hands. In truth, he'd never held a portable while wearing a suit. He'd have to be careful when he activated it, or his strong fingers could snap the tool in half. That was the last thing he needed. Zilf hacked the hatch and walked into another corridor that led to a cylindrical room, just as he'd found on level 6, only this one had several offices, meeting rooms, and many desks. A few of the holo displays remained active, various diagrams and models floating in the air. He paused to drink it all in, and his jaw dropped when he understood what he was seeing. Station 3's engineers had been working on a way to synthesize the artifact. According to what he saw on the boards, it appeared they managed to cut a slice from it, and the analyses were spread across the boards. Biochem wasn't his strong suit, but every molecule had a methyl, ethyl, or carbonyl group. An atom he didn't recognize from the periodic table appeared as a central hub for strings and strings of atoms. It reminded him of the DNA he'd seen in the specimen lab, the horned quadruple helix. Harvey wanted to take this out of here, find a new lab, and start again. He'd no doubt pilfered all the reports, studies, and information the facility had gathered since it began experimenting with the artifact. If anyone could possibly remake it, it was him. He said he'd destroyed the computer records, and he probably hadn't been lying. But first, he'd backed it all up. "No," Zilf said, "you're not getting out of here." As fast as he could, he passed through the room and to the far lift. The shaft was empty of a car, but he'd expected that, hadn't he? He tapped the stud, heard the grind of machinery, and cocked an eyebrow, fingers readjusting their grip on the plasma torch. The wait was longer than he liked, the lift making far more noise than it should have. Had this one been damaged too? As it rose into view, he suddenly understood why it was having problems. It was filled with creatures. Cursing himself, he stepped backward, the mass of his damaged leg nearly tripping him, and activated the portable plasma torch. Incapable of firing blasts, the portable shot a narrow beam of blue fire that cut through a mouth and a serrated limb. The creature, all teeth and claws, fell to the side in pain, but the ones to its rear practically trampled it trying to reach Zilf. He raised the portable's power as high as it would go and took a step forward. Through the lift's damaged roof, he saw the cable. Continuing to hold the tool's trigger, the beam sliced through approaching flesh before hitting the thick metal line. It snapped, and the car dropped. 2 of the creatures that had scrambled halfway out of the car were cut in half by the enormous descending mass. They shrieked at Zilf, who kicked each of their bodies as hard as he could with his good leg, sending them spiraling off into darkness. Panting, nerves alight, with the extra shot of adrenaline the suit had provided, he peered down the shaft, the portable plasma tool held in front of him, trigger partially depressed. The car, with nothing to stop it, has smashed through at least one infrastructure level and probably shattered when it hit an acceleration failsafe. Just as no one wanted a reactor above them, no one wanted a malfunctioning lift car breaking through a station's hull. The sensors no doubt calculated the speed and force of the car's descent, and he had activated the thick metal shield to protect the hull. He blew a sigh before looking up the shaft. It was clear. For now, he thought. All he had to do now was go up. Chapter 38. Zilf entered the lift shaft, clamped his mag gloves to the metal sides, and began to climb. It had been easy in the water, but wasn't so easy inside the station. His arms already felt like jello, fingers and palms aching like arthritis had settled in. The suit administered another cocktail before warning him it would be his last for 2 hours. No worries, he told his HUD. It'll be over by then. The climb to level 4 was both excruciatingly slow as well as painful, and twice he found himself crying out with the effort. At one point, he had to lock both legs to the wall and rest. He might even have closed his eyes and passed out for a moment. Halfway into delirium and moving as fast as a sea turtle washed ashore, he continued climbing and finally found the entrance to level 4. After pulling himself inside, he sat on the edge, legs dangling into space. The growth here had thinned from what he remembered. Perhaps reactivating the HVAC had poisoned the flora, or at least soured it. The vents were still open, stalactites of the goose still hung from the ceiling, but they appeared dried out and nearly dead. When he caught his breath and thought he could move again, he rolled, put his feet on the deck, and pulled himself up via the bulkhead. He swayed there for a moment, unsure if he needed to activate the magnetics in his boots, but the wave of vertigo passed. Despite the meds the suit had pumped into his system, the ache in his skull had returned, only now it pulsed across his vision. He couldn't keep going for long. Not that it mattered. Zilf stumbled down the corridor, his boots squelching the remaining flora, while his dragging boot cut deep furrows in the alien growth. Every few meters he looked up and saw a camera staring at him, its indicator glowing that hazardous red. Harvey was watching him. Hell, Harvey had always been watching him. Since the moment he'd ditched Griggs, the man had probably been glued to the surveillance systems, doing his best to keep out of Zilf's way while the engineer probed the station, most likely to his death. But that didn't happen, did it, Harvey? He said aloud, mic muted. It didn't happen, Recky's ghost said in his mind, because you're a goddamned wrecker. He grinned through the pain and continued walking, the portable torch reloaded with a fresh mag. Hold on, Harvey, he said to himself. I'm coming. After another turn, he finally reached the corridor where Stefan had been savaged by an unseen creature before being dragged into the vents. He eyed the open hatch where the creatures in their ton form had broken out of their chrysali to attack and chase him down the corridor. It was empty, the cocoons spent, and little more than dog-shit-looking casings. The other hatch, the one that had contained still dormant creatures, remained closed. He wondered why they hadn't activated too. Maybe the vent had been closed? The atmosphere unable to reach them? He couldn't remember, and it didn't really matter, did it? The hatch leading to the subroom remained ajar. The damage he'd done entering the station had made it useless, the airlock completely non-functional. Good, he thought. This will be easy. He pushed the hatch inward and stepped inside. A projectile pinged off his chest and he whirled to the right as his HUD flashed the message, Suit integrity at 2%. Another projectile hit the bulkhead beside him. Zilf moved as fast as he could for the sub he'd used to travel from Station 2 to 3. Before he reached cover, more than a dozen plasma rifle blasts had hit the bulkheads. Zilf breathed hard. Harvey, you're a shit shot. In response, the rifle fired again, and the projectile pinged off the sub's side.
Go away, Zilf. Go die outside.
You first, Zilf said. He unclamped the bolt gun and tossed it to the deck. The metal cutter followed with a clatter against the steel. The portable torch? He tossed that too. 2 wrenches, an almost empty mag in his suit's plasma torch, and the portable refills in his pack were all he needed for this asshole. If even that. I've been thinking about why you haven't already left, Zilf said. I'm guessing there's a team coming to pick you up from the second orbital?
Wow, took you that long to figure that out? Dumber than I thought.
Zilf shrugged, although Harvey couldn't see him. I'm slow at some things, he said, but not everything. If I go up that lift without you, who am I going to meet?
Doesn't matter. Just know it won't end well for you.
Zilf activated his interface and scanned for open connections. Harvey's suit wouldn't respond directly to his commands, but he found the controller for Harvey's sub. A grin spread over his face. He just had to keep Harvey distracted for a few minutes while he executed the plan. To keep Harvey busy, he popped his head up over the top of the sub and took a quick glance. Harvey rewarded him with a wild spray from the plasma rifle that thunked off the hull. A piece of shrapnel struck Zilf's helmet, and a new alarm appeared on his HUD. Helmet compromised. Zilf held his breath for a moment. Positive pressure established, the HUD said less than a second later. Between the suit's pressure package and his own air supply, the suit forced out any atmosphere that might leak through the helmet. The bad news was that he was rapidly losing air. He had at most 2 minutes before he breathed in whatever the artifact had created on the station. It might be long enough. He focused on the HUD, still putting together his surprise for Harvey. Just keep him talking, keep him from leaving.
Did I get you? You stopped talking. Had me worried.
No, Zilf said. Still here.
I know how damaged your suit is. One round in the wrong place and you're going to lose your air supply in a hurry.
Zilf put the final touches on the worm and transmitted it to the sub. Instructions received, the sub connection told him. Zilf killed the interface. He'd done all he could. How long before you leave? Zilf asked.
Soon. It's another reason why you should get out of here. You broke the airlock. Once my sub departs, I doubt the failsafes will last long. Lack of positive pressure and all of that.
Zilf rolled his eyes. Uh-huh. The facility dies, I die, and Station 3 just keeps churning out life forms?
Since the artifact is currently encased in thousands of metric tons of steel,
Harvey said angrily,
I doubt it will happen as rapidly. Face it, Sylph, you fucked this world up.
That was rich, Zilf thought. Instead, he said, No way to unfuck it now, is there?
No. So go back out into the corridor, hide away in one of the pressure rooms, and wait to die. Or maybe take your helmet off and take a deep breath of air. In a few hours, you'll be a new man.
The statement should have chilled him to the bone. It didn't. At this point, he just didn't care anymore. As long as Harvey died and the information died with him, Zilf would be satisfied. If only he could get to that point. Zilf tapped the sub's stud, and the cabin hatch opened. One look inside told him the interface was fried. Harvey had sabotaged it as well. Harvey's sub was the only way off the station now. If I stand up and walk out of here, you won't shoot?
No,
Harvey said.
I won't shoot unless I see a tool of any kind. I promise.
Harvey said the last words so emphatically that Zilf might have believed him if he hadn't already experienced the man's treachery multiple times, albeit secondhand. Zilf climbed inside Sub 9 and shut the hatch. A quick connection scan and he found what he was looking for. Harvey might have smashed the automated controls, but Zilf had a connection directly to the motors, meaning he could pilot it. Air supply critical, the HUD told him. Zilf sighed and activated his suit release. The metal bonding holding the suit together deteriorated instantly, a sizzling sound filling his ears. The metal surrounding his bad leg fell apart first, the heavy plates collapsing to the sub's deck. The other plates quickly followed, leaving him wearing his inner suit and helmet and nothing else. He at first held his breath, but quickly realized that was hopeless. The toxic atmosphere had no doubt gotten into the sub. The air smelled like rot, and he didn't take that as a good sign. Despite the fact it was mostly useless now, he kept the helmet. The HUD and comms would remain active for at least an hour or two. More than enough time to deal with Harvey. I'm in my sub, Zilf said. You were right about my suit. It's fucked. He thought Harvey would laugh at him or mock him. Instead, he sounded regretful.
You should have died on the lower levels, Zilf. Should have died before you got here. You and your team should never have been sent here.
Should have just sent a nuke down the lifts, Zilf said with a chuckle. Would have saved a lot of heartache.
It would have, yes. But then you would have destroyed the future.
Zilf's comm scanner lit up. New signal, probably coming through the lift cable into the functional comms array. He activated his hacks and dropped into the comms.
Doctor, are you ready to extract?
Zilf blinked. The voice was all too familiar. Wilkes. He fought the urge to scream at both men over the comms. He couldn't afford for Wilkes to know he was alive. If he did, Wilkes might warn Harvey. He could only hope Harvey didn't mention him.
Ready for extraction,
Harvey said.
I'll bring the sub up. The elevator should be ready for you.
Wilkes said.
Excellent. See you in an hour or so. Wilkes out.
Zilf killed his connection and waited. After a few seconds, Harvey said,
My ride is here. It's time to go.
Yeah, Zilf said. Time to go.
I am sorry, Zilfakir,
Harvey said.
You should be back in your home world, swimming and diving and exploring instead of here, getting ready to die.
Zilf chuckled at that. Go, asshole. May Allah piss on your ashes. Harvey laughed, and Zilf felt a vibration as the dock's machinery dropped the scientist's sub into the water. 30 seconds, Zilf thought. Maybe a minute.
I bid you adieu,
Harvey said, and disappeared from Zilf's comms. Zilf walked to one of his sub seats and sat down heavily. Every bone in his body ached and every muscle jittered with fatigue. The headache that had been muted by the suit's ministrations was back and growling like an angry, hungry animal. The vision in his left eye was more than blurry now. It was almost opaque, the migraine punishing his optic nerve. After sitting there for a full minute, he pinged Harvey's sub. It responded, and a video window appeared on his HUD. The moment Harvey had connected to the sub's interface, Zilf's program had loaded into the man's suit. Now Zilf could see through the EET suit's cams. The hollow display in front of Harvey showed the depth of the sub and its speed. Zilf figured the man had maybe 5 minutes before he reached the top of Station 3 and the lift umbilical. That was far enough. Zilf connected to his sub's interface and started the emergency escape routine. The sub vibrated beneath him, much stronger than from Harvey's departure, and jerked when the metal touched the water. In a moment, the red ocean washed over the canopy, and Zilf guided the sub out of Station 3 and into the deep waters. He set the depth to 5 km with an alarm, leaned back in his seat, and closed his eyes. He was asleep almost immediately. Destination reached, a voice said in his helmet. He opened his eyes with a start and stared blearily at his HUD. The connection to his sub told him he'd reached 5 kilometers below the surface and 2 kilometers from Station 3. Somewhere far above him, Station 2's personnel barracks awaited its humans. It would wait forever. Harvey's cam feed was still there, but the view had changed. Zilf no longer saw the sub's hollow display, but the lifts instead. Harvey was inside and rising rapidly. Without cargo, save for a human being carrying digital media, the lift had climbed faster than Zilf had thought possible. It had nearly reached the orbital. Zilf grinned sleepily. He was tired, wanted to go back to sleep. He took a breath that ended in a lung-rattling cough, spat a wad of greenish-brownish goo to the deck, and stared at it. How long did he have? Long enough, he thought. Long enough. Zilf continued watching, continued coughing. A buzzing sound began in his left ear, annoying at first, but quickly increasing in volume until it bordered on pain. Just a little longer. The lift slowed as it reached the orbital. Microgravity would soon take hold. Zilf's grin widened into a sneer. He heard Harvey talking to Wilkes, talking about coordinates to another system, someplace another ship waited for Harvey and his discovery. Zilf waited. The lift halted, and its hollow display announced there was no gravity. Zilf heard Harvey sigh through the hacked interface. A message appeared on Harvey's HUD. With love, Recky's Wreckers.
What the hell?
Harvey asked. A new message flashed across Harvey's HUD, this one much more ominous. Self-destruct activated.
What?
Harvey yelled.
Hey, Wilkes, how do I...
The feed terminated, and Zilf's HUD flashed. EET 2973 destroyed. The worm had been set to activate the self-destruct sequence when Harvey reached microgravity. Zilf had no way of knowing if the explosion had taken out the orbital, but he thought it was a good bet. Didn't matter. If Wilkes' ship survived the blast and the severing of the elevator cable, he'd be leaving without his prize and a lot of questions to answer. That was good enough. Had to be. Zilf was done. Chapter 39. Zilf wanted to sleep, but there was one last thing he needed to do. Or rather, he needed to know. He loaded the file Harvey had sent him, the one from Station 1, and played it. The cameras showed Li Xiao and Reki talking outside the triage tent, the time code reading several hours ago. Shortly after I left Station 2, Zilf thought. Blood spatters and green goo covered the tent's interior. He guessed Reki and Li Xiao had terminated the survivors. As the video played out, he saw the QM bay's warning lights begin to flash. Reki and Li Xiao exchanged a glance before the module collapsed in on itself, and the feed ended. Shen Shou had destroyed Station 1, with the rest of his team inside. His next coughing fit didn't stop. the urge to retch and empty his stomach overwhelming him for a moment, but nothing else came up. Tears flowed down his cheek, both from the pain and what he'd just seen. His belly and chest squirmed as though something were moving inside him, shifting him, changing him. The buzz in his left ear transformed into discordant tones. Give in, let go, dream, become. Zulf fell forward to the sub's deck, the armor clattering beneath him. Bolts of pain ran through his head, and he heard the sound of flesh tearing. He looked down at his right hand and watched as the fingers lengthened, webs of brownish green connecting the digits. His neck burned on both sides, and he screamed in pain, only nothing came out but blood and mucus, chunks of brown and green in a yellowy mess. Let go, dream, become. His entire body burned as though dropped in a nuclear reactor. Webbed alien toes pierced his inner suit's footies, growing longer and longer. Zulf hunched over as his spine crackled and moved. The pain was unbearable, and he lost his vision, the tones in his ears rattling his skull. He moved his new alien hands to the side of his bulbous head and tried to shriek. Nothing came out. Taking in air was like breathing acid. Zulf tried to stand but couldn't. His legs no longer supported him. The muscles had deteriorated, or maybe transformed was the more appropriate word, as had his leg bones. More joints, more ways to move. He couldn't breathe. He was screaming to breathe, but no sound came out. Zulf wriggled to the rear airlock and hit the stud. The small hatch opened, revealing a space just large enough for a suited human. Zulf wriggled inside, each motion rocking his mind with blinding pain. The cracking and clicking of his skeleton transforming echoed in the small space, his malformed face set in a silent, inhuman scream. His fingers, no longer so dexterous or capable of grasping properly, found the control panel, and he tried to punch at it, his fingers merely moving forward in response. The hatch closed. A warning klaxon went off in the airlock, but he barely heard it. When he reached to tap the control panel again, he found it out of reach. His hands and fingers no longer worked properly, had melded. The scream inside his head, the one he couldn't give voice to, seemed to push him closer to the panel. With one last motion, his melting, reforming limb touched the release. The positive pressure in the airlock pushed him gently into the ocean, his rippling body immediately descending into darkness. Hundreds of atmospheres of pressure smashed into him like a welcome, harsh lever, guiding him further into the deep. Zulf's legs joined together, becoming one, his new and improved arms turning into wide, thick fins. The artifact continued changing him as he fell further and further into the abyss, all but morphing him into the alien analog of a giant manta ray. His last human thought was, "If you could see me now, Father."